Natalie, a 34-year-old woman, has decided to share the intimate chapters of her life with the world. This revelation does not come easily, as it involves moments she isn't proud of, yet they remain an integral part of her personal story. Natalie had been married twice, each an attempt to find the happiness she longed for. She yearned for love and harmony, but sadly, these feelings never truly took root in her life. The ache of loss still lingered in her heart. Her first encounter with Brian, who would become her first husband, happened when Natalie was 25. Brian captivated her with his friendly demeanor and intellect. He showed genuine interest in her life, showering her with questions and effortlessly bringing a smile to her face. Their meeting was purely by chance. Both were waiting for a bus. Brian broke the silence, remarking, "Looks like it's going to be a long wait today." Natalie laughed in response, and an easy conversation began. The next day, Brian called and suggested they meet again. They strolled through the park, chatting about their musical tastes and culinary preferences. He preferred tea, she coffee. Laughter and shared interests brought them closer. During their walk, Brian gently took her hand, and Natalie felt a surge of belief that she had found a truly decent man. 8 months later, they were married. The early days of their marriage were filled with happiness and romance. Brian would spoil her with fresh fruits from the market. They would take walks together, watch movies, and cook dinners. In those days, Natalie often smiled, convinced she had found true love and the meaning of life. However, with time, their idyll began to crumble. Brian grew increasingly withdrawn and silent. He started staying late at work more often, returning home exhausted. When she asked how he was, he'd give a terse, "I'm fine," but Natalie sensed something was wrong. He stopped listening to her, showed no interest in her day, and spent all his free time engrossed in his phone. Dinners became agonizingly silent. Natalie desperately tried to bring back the former warmth to their relationship. She cooked his favorite meals and suggested they spend weekends together, but all she heard in return was, "I'm busy." One evening, she gathered her courage and asked him directly, "Brian, do you still love me?" He shot her a look and replied, "Don't ask silly questions," before leaving the room. Natalie was left sitting alone, staring at the cold dinner. Her heart, too, felt as if it had turned to ice. She wanted to sob, but no tears would come. For long months, Natalie lived in anticipation of change, hoping things would get better. But no miracle occurred. They lived under the same roof, yet remained strangers to each other. She felt like a mere shadow in his life, an outsider rather than a cherished wife. A profound sense of desolation enveloped her. One day, she couldn't bear it any longer and said, "I can't live like this anymore. I feel so alone." Brian remained silent, turning away. Then she uttered, "I want a divorce." He responded indifferently, "Do whatever you want." That was the ignominious end of their 3-year marriage, without arguments, without goodbyes, just in heavy silence. Natalie moved into a new apartment, modest but entirely her own. On the first night, she sat on the floor, taking in her new surroundings. The apartment was quiet. Natalie felt a pang of sadness, yet at the same time, she felt safe. For the first time in a long while, she could breathe freely. For an entire year, she lived alone, relishing her newfound freedom. She took long walks, listened to music, read books, and tried to understand herself better. She kept telling herself, "Next time I'll make the right choice. I won't rush. I'll wait for a worthy man." Soon after, fate introduced her to another man, Kevin. His warm smile and gentle voice captivated her heart. She noticed him helping elderly people cross the street and offering his seat on the bus. Natalie thought to herself, "He's completely different. He's kind and thoughtful." They met at a small dinner party hosted by mutual friends. Natalie and Kevin sat next to each other, engaging in easy conversation. He inquired about her work and she about his family. They talked for several hours, and throughout that time, Kevin consistently made her laugh and looked deeply into her eyes. Natalie felt something new, tender, and exciting. The next day, Kevin called and suggested they meet again. Natalie happily agreed. They spent time in a cozy cafe, sitting by the window. Kevin spoke of his love for old films, and Natalie listened, smiling. She hoped that this time, everything would be different. A year later, they were married. The ceremony was modest, attended by their closest friends. Natalie wore a soft pink dress and Kevin a gray jacket. Holding hands, they exchanged their vows. Natalie was happy, truly happy. She believed this was a new beginning. But soon, disappointment struck again. Silence, detachment, coldness. It all repeated. Kevin consistently stayed late at work, came home late, quickly ate dinner, and went straight to bed. When asked about his day, he'd give a terse, "Just work." Natalie waited for him to elaborate, but Kevin remained silent. Natalie began eating dinner alone. Kevin claimed he was too tired. He stopped asking about her well-being. When she complained of loneliness, he'd brush her off with, "You think too much." That phrase echoed in her mind. She'd heard those exact words from her first husband, "You think too much." Natalie couldn't believe it was all happening again. She had remarried, tried once more to build a happy family, only to find herself back in the same place, a home devoid of joy, at a table where no conversations took place, in a bed where there was no love. She felt utterly exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. One evening, Natalie prepared dinner and waited for Kevin. He arrived and informed her he had already eaten at a cafe. His eyes remained fixed on his phone. Natalie asked, "Do you want to sit with me?" Kevin replied, "I need to go to bed early." Natalie was left sitting alone, gazing at the cold dinner. She felt utterly empty. The image of her first apartment, the one she lived in after her divorce, flashed through her mind. It was small, but there she had felt a sense of peace. Now she had a more spacious home, yet she felt lost once more. She felt lost again, wandering through the labyrinths of life. Two men, a heart given twice, and twice it had been shattered into pieces. Changes began to stir within her soul. The habit of cooking for two faded into the past. Waiting by the door and hoping for something better were no longer her companions. She started taking solitary walks, finding solace in the park, observing passers-by. The sound of children's laughter and the sight of elderly couples holding hands stirred a longing for what she so desperately missed. Sometimes the question would surface in her mind, "Is there something wrong with me?" Yet she knew she had given her all, loving sincerely and devotedly. However, love wasn't solely about effort, it also required choosing the right partner. She was still married, but loneliness enveloped her once more. The house she lived in no longer felt like a true home. Her words went unheard, and the smile she offered to others concealed an inner pain. The future was hazy, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her. She had dreamed of love and peace of mind, hoping to find them in marriage, but her expectations remained unfulfilled. Twice she had married, yet the pain still gnawed at her heart. One morning, waking early, she saw the sun, but her heart was heavy. Kevin, her husband, was still asleep, as usual, preferring to linger in bed on weekends. Looking at him, she saw a peaceful expression on his face, but felt no sense of closeness. For 2 years of their marriage, she had strived to be a good wife. She cooked breakfast, kept the house tidy, and offered a welcoming smile when he returned from work. Yet she didn't feel seen or loved. One day she asked, "Do you love me?" Kevin, looking at her, replied, "You always ask that." She explained, "Because I don't feel it." Getting out of bed, he said, "I work hard. Isn't that a display of love?" After those words, he left the room, leaving her alone at the table, slowly sipping her tea. She wanted to believe him, to feel something, but she couldn't. Love wasn't just about working and coming home, it was also about care, listening, and dedicating time to each other. That week, Kevin returned home late every evening. Explaining it was due to demanding work, she suggested, "Perhaps we could have dinner together sometime?" He replied, "Maybe next week." But that week never arrived. On Sunday, she decided to visit her old friend, Sophie. They sat in the kitchen, sipping tea. Sophie, looking at her, remarked, "You look sad." She confessed, "I feel utterly drained." Sophie took her hand and offered, "Tell me what's happened." She confided everything about Brian, about Kevin, and about how profoundly lonely she had felt in both homes. Sophie listened intently, and then, after a long silence, she said, "You give too much, Natalie, and they give nothing in return." Those words resonated deeply within her. All night she pondered them. You give too much. It was true. She had given her time, her care, and her love, but what did she receive in return? Silence, cold words, an empty table, and a lonely bed. She began taking morning walks to breathe fresh air and clear her mind. The park near her home was quiet. She enjoyed sitting on a bench, watching the trees, people walking their dogs, and children playing. The sounds of laughter filled her heart with warmth, reminding her that she was still alive. One day, she saw an elderly couple walking slowly, hand in hand. The man gently held the woman's hand, and she smiled at him. Love was evident in his gaze. At that moment, she felt a tear roll down her cheek. She yearned for that same kind of simple, genuine love. That evening, Kevin returned home earlier than usual. She was surprised and asked, "You're home before dinner?" He replied, "Yes, I'm tired." She suggested, "Perhaps we should talk?" He refused. "Not now, I have a headache." With those words, he retreated to the bedroom. She stood frozen, staring at the food on the stove. Turning it off, she sank to the floor, feeling small and insignificant. Her voice had no place in that home, nor did her heart find any rest there. A few days later, she made another attempt. "Kevin, we don't talk, we don't laugh. We live like two strangers in one house, not like a family." He looked at her and asked, "What do you want from me?" She replied, "I want to feel loved." He countered, "Love doesn't always have to be loud." After those words, he left the room again. After that, she stopped asking questions, waiting and hoping. She cooked meals only for herself, watched movies alone, and walked in the park, enjoying the quiet. She began reading books again and jotting down her thoughts on her phone, striving to reclaim her own voice. One day, Sophie came to visit her. Looking around, she remarked, "It's so quiet here." She replied, "Yes, it's always quiet now." Sophie looked at her and asked, "Do you want to stay in this life?" She paused, then answered, "I don't know." She truly didn't know. She was tired of constant disappointments, hopes, and new beginnings, but she also didn't want to remain where there was no love. The protagonist of the story felt the flame of love flickering out in her marriage, feeling out of place, as if in a dwelling where tender emotions had no home. Kevin, it seemed, didn't notice the changes unfolding, perhaps indifferent to what was happening. He continued his routine, eating, going to work, and returning home, immediately immersing himself in the world of his phone. Exhausted, the protagonist ceased her attempts to initiate dialogue, having run out of words. One day, looking at her reflection, she saw a tired face and sad eyes in the mirror. In that moment, she realized she was still young and had time she couldn't afford to waste on silent suffering. That same day, packing a modest bag, she left home and went to Sophie's. After several days there, the protagonist received neither a call nor a question from Kevin about her whereabouts or well-being. Only on the fourth day did he send a message, inquiring if she intended to return. To her negative reply, he merely asked dryly about her state. Receiving no words of longing, he again asked about her return, to which she couldn't respond, unsure of what to say. Sophie, showing her sensitivity, assured her there was no need to return to a place that caused her pain. The protagonist, understanding the truth in her friend's words, realized the full complexity of her situation. A second marriage, a second attempt to build a family, and once again, the necessity to leave. It felt as though she had failed yet again, but deep down she understood that this was not a defeat, but a realization of truth, a life lesson, and a choice for peace, an act of self-love. Sitting on Sophie's sofa, gazing out the window at the trees swaying in the wind, she took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Everything will be all right." Kevin never called again, not even to inquire about the reason for her departure, which served as final confirmation of his detachment and the absence of true intimacy. Just as with Brian, she had given her heart twice, but no one had been able to cherish it with proper care. While staying with Sophie, the protagonist contemplated her next steps, unwilling to rush into marriage again. She needed time to heal her wounds, rediscover herself, and perhaps one day to love again. For now, she yearned for freedom, to awaken in a place where she felt safe, where she could genuinely smile, speak, and be heard. A place where love was not just a word, but a genuine feeling. After 2 failed marriages, the pain still lingered. She yearned to shed it and find peace, but this time she sought it within herself. The protagonist continued to live with Sophie, whose small but cozy home exuded an atmosphere of warmth. They spent evenings talking, enjoying simple meals, and watching old films that brought forth genuine laughter, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Sophie didn't press her to return home. Instead, she simply offered support, saying, "Don't rush." The protagonist was grateful to Sophie for being the only person who truly saw her, offering no advice, but simply listening. One morning, waking up and looking out the window at the rainy gray sky, she felt a sense of calm. Sitting with a cup of tea, she reflected on her life and the reasons she had stayed in unhappy marriages for so long. The fear of loneliness, the hope for things to improve, and the conviction that true love must always involve pain had kept her tethered. But now she understood that true love shouldn't be like that. A few days later, she informed Sophie of her desire to find her own place. Her friend gladly offered her help, and after 2 weeks of searching, they found a small apartment with 1 bedroom, a kitchen, and a tiny balcony. The apartment was modest but cozy, and the protagonist immediately felt an affinity for it. Moving in with just a few belongings, she placed her favorite cup by the window, draped a soft blanket over a chair, and made the bed with white sheets. That night, sitting on the balcony and gazing at the stars, she felt a long-awaited sense of peace. Silence, not cold and frightening, but soft and safe, enveloped her. No one yelled anymore, no one left, and no one told her she was too much. She made new plans for each day, morning walks, buying fresh fruit at the market, reading books in the park, while watching the swaying trees. She started to smile again. Sometimes the pain would return, like a gentle breeze touching her heart. But she didn't fight it. Instead, she accepted it, allowing it to pass, telling herself, "You are a part of me, but you don't control me." One day in the park, she met an elderly woman sitting on a nearby bench. They admired the flowers together, and the woman, smiling, remarked, "They grow slowly, but they always bloom." The protagonist agreed, adding that they simply needed care. The woman nodded and said it was the same for people. After a brief silence, the woman inquired if the protagonist lived nearby. Learning she resided just 2 blocks away, the woman shared that she often came to the park after her husband's passing the previous year. The protagonist, sympathizing, confessed that she had lost 2 partners, though in a different way. The woman, touching her hand, said encouragingly, "You are still young. You will be strong again." Her gentle words deeply moved the protagonist, and she repeated them to herself before falling asleep. She repeated them to herself like a mantra before drifting off to sleep. A few days later, a message from Kevin appeared on her phone screen. "Are you okay?" Natalie's gaze skimmed over it, but no shadow of sadness or flicker of anger stirred within her. Only an all-consuming emptiness remained. She chose to leave the message unanswered, unwilling to reopen the door to the past. That night, she reflected on the path she had walked, the sea of tears shed in pleas for love, the long hours spent waiting in silence. Now she stood alone, not broken, still healing, but no longer lost. One day in a regular store, someone called out, "Natalie?" She looked up and saw a familiar face. "Yes, that's me," she replied. "It's Zoe. We went to school together." A smile lit up her face, bringing back old memories. After a few minutes of easy conversation, Zoe suggested, "I live nearby. We absolutely have to meet up." "Yes, of course," Natalie replied. Soon after, they met at a cozy cafe near her home. The conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on their school years, life's twists and turns, and of course, love. "I got divorced last year," Zoe shared. "Me too, twice," Natalie replied. Their laughter held no malice, only the relief of being able to speak the truth openly. "It's not easy," Zoe stated. "No, not at all," Natalie agreed. But despite everything they had been through, they smiled, finding understanding and support in each other. From then on, their meetings became a weekly tradition. They took walks in the park and had heartfelt conversations that lasted for hours. "I thought I was the only one," Zoe confessed. "Me too," Natalie replied. But they weren't alone. There were many women around them striving for happiness, giving their all, and hoping for the best. They simply hadn't spoken about it aloud before. Now, by opening up to each other, they felt a profound sense of relief. Their conversations healed, their empathy provided support, and the realization that they were seen and understood gave them strength. One evening, sitting on her balcony, Natalie watched the hustle and bustle of the street below. Her gaze caught a small boy expertly riding his bicycle, with his father running alongside, cheering him on. A smile touched her lips. There was no sadness in her heart, just a feeling of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but it no longer troubled her. She had stopped waiting for a prince on a white horse. She had stopped looking for love externally. Now she was learning to love herself, and at this stage, that was more than enough. One morning, looking at her reflection in the mirror, she noticed a softness in her gaze and strength in her features. "You are still healing, but you are not weak. You are not broken," she said aloud. Having been married twice, having given her heart twice, having lost herself twice, she was now slowly, gently, and carefully returning to her true self. And this time, she would not allow herself to get lost again.